Welcome to 5 Good Questions. I'm your host, Jake Taylor. Our guest today is Julius Bailey. Julius is an associate professor of philosophy at Wittenberg University. He's a philosopher, cultural critic, social theorist, and diversity lecturer. Julius is the founder of Project 8, a youth service organization that focuses on leadership and civic participation. He holds master's degrees from Howard and Harvard universities and a doctorate from the University of Illinois. Today we're going to be discussing his book, Philosophy and HipHop. I grew up on hip-hop, so I'm excited to ask Julius 5 good questions. All right, welcome back to the show, everybody. My guest today is Julius Bailey, author of Philosophy and HipHop. Hey, Julius, thank you for taking the time to be with us today.
I appreciate you, Jake.
So let's jump right in. Question number 1, why connect philosophy and hip-hop together? What was your inspiration for that? And maybe it would help if you define the term hip-hop. I think a lot of people, myself included, probably before reading this book, maybe had the idea of the definition of hip-hop as really what would be more called like rap music,
Right.
as opposed to a bigger kind of cultural phenomena.
Right.
So why philosophy and hip-hop?
Well, I mean, I appreciate that question. I mean, so ideally, the best way to respond is to agree that I think the best way for us to look at this is rap music is a subset, if you will, or a part of hip hop as a whole, right? Now, it is clearly the most, sort of known part, right? The most sort of engaged part, but it's certainly a part. And so for me, I grew up in Chicago. And so I wasn't really in the 80s. I wasn't really a hip hop head, if you will. I knew of the Beastie Boys. I knew of Run DMC and all those early rap groups. But I was from Chicago, house music, techno, that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
But I went to school on the East Coast. And so I went to Howard University as an undergrad. And I was at Howard at the time that Sean Combs was there in Puffy, as well as Tracy Lee, who's also a known rapper now. And so being a student, I became interested in hip hop. Then after I left Howard, I went to Harvard. And then at Harvard, my fellowship was across the hall from a writer named Trisha Rose. And Trisha Rose, we call in academia the sort of the birthplace, if you will. I mean, her work, Black Noise, is sort of the Bible of hip hop studies. And so I'm across the hall from her as a graduate student, and she was doing a postdoc after she wrote the book. And I'm listening to her, talk, sort of broadly about hip hop. It was more than just, the rappers. It was about the culture. Mm-hmm. And so I was a philosopher. She was a cultural theorist. Then we have these students up and down the hallway of African American studies, really interested to know what Trisha is doing. I was a teaching assistant for Cornell West. So I have a lot of these philosophers coming in, these people interested in music. And so it just became curious to me how to merge what I do as a discipline with the way people live their lives. And so, Jake, the best way that I explain to students is that if we think of philosophy as a discipline and not as a subject, if we realize that what we do in philosophy has no containers, right? I mean, we're able to think about and to engage with every aspect of what it means to be in the world, as well as what does it mean for humans not to be, how the world operates, right? And so, but hip hop specifically, as a lived experience within a particular context, then becomes what we call in philosophy a phenomenological experience. And so as a phenomenological experience, and what we mean by that is a study of phenomena, which is experiences, right? And so as a study of experiences, now I can engage every aspect of philosophy in that: ethics, logic, metaphysics, the study of empiricism and how knowledge is possible, religion. All these things become part of the hip hop experience. Why? Because hip hop is speaking to their lived reality on a day-to-day basis.
So question number 2, a little personal story real quick about that. So growing up, I think I remember I was 11 or 12, and I bought Snoop Dogg's first solo album, and I brought it home, and my stepdad listened to it and was wasn't pleased with some of the some of the lyrics, and I actually had to return the CD. And I ended up getting like embarrassing, I think, a little bit. But I got like a Tony CD. So totally
feels good.
Yeah, exactly. So my question for number 2 is, how did gangsta rap specifically impact hip hop?
Wow. Yeah. So if we were to begin hip hop with Snoop Dogg, I think your dad has a point, right? so I think we have to ask ourselves if what hip hop is uniquely a part of what Snoop Dogg and Dre and them were producing in the 90s, then we would really have to raise some questions about its efficacy, right? Not necessarily about its truthfulness, but about its meaning within the world, right? So I think the best way for me to look at that is that if we recognize as, I don't know what political bent your audience is, but, I tend to lean more left, right? And so as I lean more left, I recognize not necessarily Marxian, but I recognize that there are materialist social structures in play that people have to live within. Right. So when we think about poverty, we think about the ways in which housing discrimination plays into the role of the lived experience. These are realities that individuals must live within as they're trying to sort of navigate their way through how to pay bills, how to pay rent, all that type of stuff. Right. And so when you add in issues of the erection or the bringing together of housing communities, when you talk about things like gentrification and the moving out of cities and leaving the cities almost in a Blythe kind of reality. I mean, the byproduct, if you will, of some of that becomes anguish, angst, frustration, and quite frankly, in many cases, violence, right? So now, if we see that as it is, then the musics of a people or the song of the people, of a people, typically revolves around the experiences of a people, right? And so now, if in fact Snoop Dogg, who we recognize his sort of phenomenology as a gangster, within the Crips, gang, involved in drugs and fighting and maybe even shooting, if you believe some of the stories or whatever, these become part of his reality, not the whole content, but part of it. And so part of what gangster rap does, it gives us a glimpse into part of that American, not uniquely American, but certainly very endemically American part of what it means to live in inner city America. And so hip hop speaks to that, but it's not solely that, right? I mean, if you think about it, you think about like Donald Trump now, right? I mean, he'll say things like, Black people, we have to take care of our inner cities because you can't even walk into the store without getting shot, right? Now, if you think about that, and if a rapper said that, right, then a rapper, we have to raise critical questions. It may be a day that somebody got shot at the store. It may be 3 days within a week that somebody got shot at the store. But if the store is still there for 20, 30 years, other things happen at the store too. Other things happen on the block too. If shootings was the only thing that happened on a particular block, that block wouldn't exist, that store wouldn't exist, this conversation wouldn't exist. So I think your dad was right if he looked at hip hop specifically through the prism of a Snoop Dogg. But what America fears, I argue, it fears is the proliferation of violence within, within the urban areas and the inner city. And what I fear, quite frankly, as a father, is young people thinking that's the only option, right? Violence and only option. So the beauty of hip hop is that's just a segment of it. It may be a popular segment. It may be more popular in other areas than some, but it's just a segment of it. So you can have individuals talking about, I'm going to shoot this person up. You got another individual talking about, I'm going to, how much I want to dream about a better tomorrow. You might have somebody say, I'm going to have me 20 women by, 20 children by 19 different women. And you have other people that say, I love my wife and I want to be the best father that I can be. So there is a spectrum of the language of hip hop that isn't specific to gangster rap. But let me just say this real quickly. But the beauty, I think, of I don't know if beauty is the right word, but the interesting thing about gangster rap is that it pushed America's legal system, right? And so when we think about what we talk about in terms of censorship in music, or we talk about issues of art as freedom of speech and the way in which I can do videos, right? We can critique, and we can rightfully critique as a function of the beauty of art, right? In a sort of a Platonic sense, right? Mm-hmm. Is this art beautiful, right? We can make that, and that's what we as philosophers do. But legally, the question is, do I have the right to produce that art? Right. And so gangster rap pushes that conversation and says, America, if you fashion yourself as being antithetical to this type of gangster rap or this type of gangster conversation, but yet the hypocritical part of it is these types of actions, pillaging of neighborhoods, raping of women, violence and extraction of wealth from other people. These things are, quite frankly, a part of the American ethos. And so it makes us question what does it mean to be American if we question what does it mean to be a gangster rapper.
So that's a pretty good segue, I think, to question number 3. Warren Buffett has famously espoused this idea of following an inner scorecard. And basically kind of being true to yourself.
Yeah.
How do you think that ties in with hip hop and the idea of authenticity and that not selling out? I think is kind of one of the you're being a legit to the streets still kind of reputation, while also endeavoring kind of in a commercial enterprise.
Right. Well, man, that's a tough question there, right? Because I think for me, as a philosopher, I am also an existentialist. So I am fundamentally engaged in this question of what it means to be an authentic being, to be a free thinking and free spirit, right? So if you remember in the book, I devote chapters 6 and 7, primarily 6, to this question specifically. And that is to say, what does it mean to make a distinction between the artist and the image, right? And so images, by its very nature, are commodified, right? So what I mean by that is an artist or a person creates something, and whatever that thing that person creates then has the eyes of others upon it, right? Once the eyes of others become upon that very thing that I created, that now is its own entity, right? So the way I tell my students all the time is, if I have an idea in my head, the only way that idea can come into reality is through the use of sort of raw materials that I have within a finite space. So the sort of the fluidity or the infinity of my idea becomes limited within the apparatus or the things that I have in front of me. Once I put that idea into physical practice, now that idea gets put out into public space. Now the public now has a way to change whatever it is that I put out, or to interpret whatever I put out the way the public wants to interpret it, right? So now I have no control over my idea anymore. My idea has become actualized through my painting, through my sculpture, through my words. Once I speak my words, someone else hears it, someone else sees it, someone else interprets it. Once they interpret it, I am no longer in control of my idea. Right? Now, with that saying, Warren Buffett's construction to me as a philosopher is problematic a little bit. We deal with the inner and the outer, no question. We deal, and especially with the question of authenticity, or when we deal with the question of the inner me and the true me, if you will, the authentic self versus the inauthentic self. right? But the inauthentic self in Warren Buffett's construction is something like a bureaucrat, right? I think that's the language he uses. A bureaucrat is inauthentic, where a leader is authentic, right? And so when we think about what bureaucrats do, bureaucrats have purpose, right? We call it in philosophy teleos, right? And so when we think about art, I always ask students, what's the purpose of art, right? If the purpose of art was for art's sake, right, then it stays in the realm of the idea, right? But once I create the art, I am creating the art for consumption. And once I create the art for consumption, now my art become image, and my image now either A, has to be approved by others, or even if it doesn't become approved by others, then it limits my ability to be useful. And in utility, or in teleos, it's important to be useful. Bureaucrats are useful people. Every day we tell our kids every day to go get a job. That's utility. That's usefulness. Warren Buffett is right. Authenticity has to do with leadership, but so does bureaucratic realities. I mean, you can't be a Donald Trump, for instance, and not be a bureaucrat, right? I mean, you have to have some skills. You have to have some sense of utility, and people had to have benefited from the very things that you did. It's not having a vision of business without actually putting the business into play. Right. And so the same thing with hip hop. It's one thing to say, I have an idea to be an artist, or I am a great artist. But if I don't put my art into action, now the question becomes, my art has to then now be interpreted by someone. The example I always give in class is like, if I'm a dancer and then I'm dancing in my room by myself with all the mirrors around, and I have the best lines, I have the best flow, doing everything great. No one would call me a dancer because no one has seen me dance, right? Now, if dancing is an ontological thing, and by ontology is linking back to being, and being is linking back to what Warren Buffett is calling the inner self or authenticity, then I can posit myself as anything. I can wake up, for instance, as a big black man that I am, I can say as a part of my inner self, no, I'm not a big black man. I'm a skinny, mile running white man from Norwegia. You know what I'm saying? And so now you say, wait a minute, but that's not who you are. I'm like, sure it is. And that's my inner self, right? My outer self becomes something y'all see, or y'all just see this big black man. Oh, no. Y'all looking at it wrong, right? You can't say that, right? Because we all are embodied by something. Our music, Jake, is embodied by something. Our art is embodied by something. The very things that we teach our children, we teach our girls, or don't do this or don't do that. Why? Not because we don't want them to be authentic. I have a daughter. I don't know if you do, but my daughter every day, I don't want you out there with your butt all hanging out and things like that. Well, how come, Daddy? Then I have to think myself, do I want you to be authentic? Is it for her to be authentic to be naked running around the city? No, that's not an authentic self. But if she decides I want to be naked, then is that what leadership is? No, we have to live in a society of convention. And we have to realize that people can be useful as well as be leaders and not necessarily be looked at as inauthentic. Is there inauthentic hip hop? Sure it is. Folk who do what they do just to get paid, for instance, right? Mm-hmm. Now, there's nothing wrong with commodity. It's all a commodity, right? Image is commodification. I'm with that. But if you show no sense of creativity, if you are parroting or puppeting and we see that a lot in hip hop now, but that makes sense business-wise. Why? Because there is a business model. And if there's a business model, ask McDonald's about it. Do we think McDonald's is not successful? They do it because they followed a model for all these years. Anything that diverts from the model is not successful. And so then I have to define success. Here is what happens in chapter 7. I call it the catastrophe of success. So now you have somebody like a Kanye West who's speaking that Tennessee Williams model of catastrophe of success and says, wait a minute, here I am trying to be the best rapper that I could be, trying to follow all the models that met before me. And as he says in the song Pinocchio Boy, can I just be a real boy? Mm-hmm. Right? I just want to be a real boy.
I think
And so you see later on his music becomes more and more authentic, less and less loved by the hip hop community, but more and more free in his artistic spirit. And this, I think, is what we call authenticity in hip hop.
I think that's a perfect segue for question number 4. It seems like to me that and maybe this was more early on, and maybe, like you said, there's been some development here, and maybe we can flesh that out. But it was like sort of a zero-sum game where between different MCs, like you would build yourself up by putting other people down, bragging about your own success. And I know for me personally, I can just say that my favorite artists were the ones who were more vulnerable and less about just bragging about money and cars and alcohol and women. But the ones who you felt like they actually let some more of themselves out and, showed some insecurity. And has that been an evolution that's been happening? Is it becoming more authentic that way, or is that just kind of my own, what I've been drawn towards?
Right. Well, I don't necessarily think it's an either or there either, Jake. I think it's a little bit of both. I think that, again, as I like to always urge people to don't think of hip hop as separate from the American ethos, right? And so when we think of America, right, America doesn't see itself as vulnerable. America doesn't see itself as sad and finite, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
it's exceptional.
I mean, the best of America is seeing itself as the greatest in the world, right? And so if as a country we fashion ourselves, or at least we want to see ourselves as the greatest in the world, then all of our products should at least maintain a similar type of ethos, right? Now, as you remember in the book, right, chapter 2, which I think is one of the best chapters in the book, if you will, it talks about the battle rap tradition, firebrands and battle plans. And that chapter, I've heard from philosophers all over the country and teachers that students love that chapter, because the purpose of that chapter is exactly what you're asking. It's saying, why is rap specifically, but not just rap, because we see it in dance crews, or where we see it in graffiti artists. Everybody's trying to one up the next, right? I'm the best, I'm the baddest tagger, I'm the baddest dancer, I'm the dopest MC. And in the process of being the dopest, I must decrease you, excuse the theological reference, so that I can be increased, right? And so there's this sort of fundamental scaling or seesaw reality that takes place. My uplift is only linked, especially in battle culture, to my ability to demise others. It's purely imperialistic, right? I mean, and so from a political realm, folk should truly understand hip hop, right? It's imperialism. That's what it is. I destroy so I can conquer. I conquer so I can lead. Once I lead, I'm on top of the world until someone else takes me out, right? I mean, that's what it is. But what that chapter does, Jake, it says this. The interesting thing about hip hop is there comes a time every now and then when you have those God MCs. And those God MCs are those who see themselves in a higher realm of reality, who says, I don't have to get into the mess and the dirt and the filth of denying others to accept myself, that I am because I am. Right? That's the God thing, right? I am because I am. And so this self-apotheosis becomes a fundamental aspect of some aspects of hip hop. And so when you have individuals, for instance, I give an example all the time about Jay-Z. I mean, Jay-Z in the last 15 years, he ain't battling with nobody. He figure what I need to battle with you for, right?
Yeah, I'm above that.
My battling with you only elevates you. It don't do nothing for me. Right? I mean, I can't get no higher than I am, right? And so the reality is that individuals, and the one funny thing, there was about 3 years ago, there was, when Kendrick Lamar came on the scene, he came on the scene with a verse out of a Big Sean song. And this verse, I mean, he was going in on the verse on all rappers, telling all these rappers, I'm taking all your fans. And the song was called Control. And it was a control verse by Big Sean, and Kendrick Lamar came in with his verse. And in his verse, I'm taking all your fans, I'm taking all your Twitter followers, I'm gonna be the greatest rapper around, and was naming rappers one by one by one. Now, all of a sudden now all these rappers take the control verse, and then they started coming back and responding to Big Sean. Once that, I'm sorry, to Kendrick Lamar. Once they responded to Kendrick, it gave Kendrick credibility, right? A credibility he didn't have initially. And so he had it the way he went at rappers. And when he went at rappers, they came back at him because, again, the way the psyche represents, I'm not going to let no whack rapper try to outdo me. I'm going to outdo them. Once I outdo them, I've given them credibility. And so they asked one of the rap journalists asked Sean Combs one day, I noticed that Kendrick Lamar didn't mention you in the Control reference. Do you have anything to say about Kendrick Lamar? And Sean Combs said, who?
That's like the ultimate diss, right?
Right. They asked Jay-Z the same thing. I noticed he talked about all these rappers. He didn't mention your name, Jay. Do you have anything to say about why don't you think he mentioned your name? He said, because I'm worth almost $1 billion. Right? Why would you mention my name, right? I don't play in the same pond as you play with, kid. You know what I'm saying? That is what I argue. That's authenticity too, Jake. But there's also a sense to which the battle plan that is endemic to hip hop, that is also linked, I argue, again, linked to a bigger imperialistic reality. That plan is endemic to hip hop, no question, but it doesn't have to be if you have an authentic self-reality that is not linked to the diminishing of others.
So let's switch it up with a fun question number 5. Who's on your hip hop Mount Rushmore?
Yeah, you asked me this question, man. I knew you was gonna ask me that. So let me just say this real quick, and I'm get out your way. I ask this question sometimes in class just for fun, right? To people say, and I very rarely agree with nobody in the class, right? So for me, if I think of what Mount Rushmore represents to America, I have to think about, and since it hasn't been changed yet, I have to think about what the construction of hip hop is and how that has laid the foundation for what it is now, right? So with that being said, I have to put the Godfathers on there. I have to put, people like half a bust of Kool Herc and a half a bust of Africa Bambaataa. Half of them. Why? Because they were DJs who ushered in hip hop in the way it should be. So I can't put both of them. I'm going to take it up half my, so I put a half of Bam and a half of Herc. I have to put in a DJ because that's just the foundation of hip hop. I think you have to put a Russell Simmons in there, man. You have to put Russell Simmons in there because Def Jam, it was the catalyst to what we know of a hip hop industry. And so I can either put Russell Simmons in there or I can put all the people in Def Jam. Run DMC, Public Enemy, Beastie Boys, Fat Boys, all them, right? Because that's what put it out into public sphere, right? So I have to put Russell Simmons and Def Jam in there. So Kool Herc Bam 1, Russell Simmons 2. If I have to put a rapper in there that at least lays the foundation, I think, of what it means to be an MC, for me, I would put in a Rakim, and probably a Lauryn Hill. So I think Lauryn Hill, Rakim, a half a bust of Kool Herc and Africa Bambaataa, and Russell Simmons with a sort of a Run DMC jacket with some pictures of a Public Enemy and everybody else on his jacket.
So what? Just out of curiosity, what the Lauryn Hill pick? What's the logic behind that? Man,
again, I think of the development. One, I hate to use this word, but the true use of women in the art form that has been fully respected, right? In the Roxannes, you have a number of women who predates Lauryn Hill, right? And so MC Lyte, I could think of her, for instance, obviously, but I think for me, Lauryn Hill pushed the envelope out, raised the bar in terms of lyricism in such a way, and conscious lyricism, right? And so now you have a female who no one questions has the lyricism, and then has a lyricism linked to consciousness, I think, which is why I put a Rakim too, right? Because he is both rapper and conscious rapper at the same time, right?
Yeah, very early on in that too.
When we think about the foundation, why? Because if you ask yourself about Jefferson or Frank, all them people, I mean, they had a sort of a vision, right? And so you have a certain people with vision on Mount Rushmore.
So let's wrap things up with, we always get a book recommendation. What do you have for us today?
Well, I am a fan of Toni Morrison's Beloved. And Toni Morrison's Beloved is more of a historical text. Some people don't like reading history all the time, so I understand, especially history among, that deals with issues of slavery. But with Toni Morrison's Beloved, it's post-slavery, but it deals with the residual effects of slavery. And but within Toni Morrison's project, and she is a Nobel laureate writer. I mean, she's written, she's done excellent work with The Bluest Eye, with everything that she's done, Paradise and all the stuff she's done. But with Toni Morrison, I think what the reader gets is a deep sense of history. She's Catholic, and so you get this sort of Catholic guilt that comes within the individual trying to navigate within the world, and a sense of responsibility, right? So, I mean, the story is around, Toni Morrison holding this woman responsible who is trying or who succeeded at killing one of her children, but yet wanted to kill a lot more of her children. And so Toni Morrison is saying, wait a minute, I don't care what the reason you had for killing your children. You have to deal with the fact that you killed a child. And what does the community and what does your God say about you when you're killing children, even trying to kill them to escape slavery? And so I think at a time like this, the book is passionate. The book is compassionate. The book is thoroughly stirring from the first scene to the last. It deals with mysticism. It deals with reality. It has a whole gamut. So I would urge people to read Toni Morrison's Beloved. And of course, I can't leave you without my book, right? So of course, you got The Cultural Impact of Kanye West, which is my edited volume. Jay-Z, The Philosopher, Hip-Hop King, which is my book. The Philosophy of Hip-Hop, the book that came before my book, obviously. And then, of course, the book that brought us here today is Philosophy and Hip-Hop. Right, those are must-read books. But Jake, I would just tell people to go on my website, juliusbailey.com, see all my works, see everything that I do. Ask me some more questions through you or through your site, and I appreciate you inviting me on today.
Well, Julius, it was a real pleasure, and thanks for coming on. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this interview. If you'd like to support this author and purchase their book, click here. If you'd like to become a subscriber to 5GQ, click here. And I included a couple other interviews that you might appreciate right here. Thanks, happy reading.